Elias's wooden house was nestled deep within an oak and pine forest, completely isolated from the outside world. Now over 60, he had lived here for more than 30 years, but only after that fateful day did this house truly become a lonely fortress built from pain and loss. In the winter of 2006, snow blanketed the roof, the rotting fences, and even the old Ford pickup truck that hadn't moved in ages. The dense, pristine, and spotless layer of snow was like a curtain that concealed everything, including the unhealing scars in Elias's heart. Inside the space was enveloped in the dim light of the early morning. The small fire in the fireplace was just enough to ward off a little of the cold, but not enough to warm his soul. Elias sat on his old armchair, the calloused hands of a skilled carpenter now tightly gripping a cold coffee cup. His gaze was distant, staring through the condensation-covered window at the forest sleeping beneath the blanket of snow. He hated the snow. Every pure white snowflake, so pristine to others, was a symbol of coldness and cruelty to him. It brought back memories of the day his life took a different turn, a path without Sarah and Lily. That pain, like an invisible monster, had devoured all the colors from his life. Sarah, his wife, was an elementary school teacher with a smile as warm as summer sunlight. Lily, his daughter, was a girl with golden hair, sparkling eyes, and a boundless imagination. She often sat in his workshop watching him carve each piece of wood. Elias still remembered vividly how he had promised to make Lily a beautiful wooden doll for that Christmas. But that promise was never fulfilled. 10 years ago, on a snow-covered highway, Sarah and Lily's car had skidded. The accident claimed the lives of the two most important women in his life. Since then, Elias had become reclusive. He gave up carpentry, left Lily's doll unfinished, and imprisoned himself in this house, a companion to solitude and his old dog, Jasper. Jasper, with his silver-grey coat and wise eyes, was Elias's only friend. He lay curled up at his feet, breathing softly. Jasper seemed to understand Elias's pain. He never demanded anything, just silently stayed by his side. This morning the silence was suddenly broken. The sun began to rise, casting its first weak rays that made the ice crystals on the branches sparkle. Elias stood up, put on his thick jacket, and decided to go out for firewood. As he opened the back door, a blast of cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Stepping onto the porch, he saw something unusual. On the pristine white snow, a small crack appeared. It was a footprint, a very small one, certainly not Jasper's or his own. It was tiny, deeply imprinted in the snow, and the strange thing was that it was only one way. It led straight from the forest towards the back door of the house. There were no returning footprints. A sense of unease welled up inside Elias. Who would walk alone on a cold, snowy night like this? A child that was illogical. He followed the footprint, his steps heavy, examining each mark. The small print, which looked like it belonged to an old athletic shoe, stopped right at the doorstep. Elias turned back, staring at the door he had just come out of. There were definitely no returning footprints. Had he made a mistake, or was it someone's prank? But out here in this desolate place, who would be playing games, curiosity overcame his doubt. Elias pushed the old wooden door wide open. A gust of biting wind swept in. He peered around the kitchen, a room that was always clean and tidy. Right on the floor, near the entrance, a small object was peeking out from behind the doormat. Elias bent down. It was a red woolen glove, soaked and dirty. The glove was tiny, certainly not for an adult. A stream of thoughts raced through his mind. The footprint, the glove. A child had been here. That child had run from something and sought refuge in his home. A feeling of both fear and confusion arose. For more than 10 years he had locked the door to his heart. He didn't want to get involved with anyone. He didn't want to be responsible for anyone. His heart had suffered enough. Would interfering in this bring new troubles? He looked at Jasper. The old dog was looking up at him, its eyes gleaming with a hint of worry. Jasper let out a soft growl, moved closer to the door and sniffed. It seemed to have detected something. Elias knew Jasper was never wrong. A small life was out there somewhere in the deadly cold of winter. Elias looked outside towards the snow-covered pine trees where the footprints had disappeared. He stood there in the quiet of the morning, hearing his own heart being torn. On one side was the familiar safety and solitude. On the other was the silent cry for help from a child. Finally, fear could not overcome the instinct of a man who had once been a father. He could not let a child freeze to death outdoors. Even if his own life had no meaning, he could not turn a blind eye to a life in need of help. He made his decision. He picked up the red glove, clutching it tightly in his palm. The glove still held a little warmth, a fragile bit of life. Elias closed the door, but this time he didn't lock it. He called for Jasper, put on another coat, and stepped outside. He didn't look back at the old footprints. He looked straight ahead, where the fresh tracks were still faint. He had to find that child, no matter what he had to find them. And in that moment, for the first time in 10 years, Elias felt his heart beat strongly again. Not from pain, but from something new, something that felt like hope. After picking up the red glove, Elias no longer hesitated. He took a deep breath, feeling the bone-chilling cold of the American Midwest at the end of the year, and called for Jasper. His voice was deep and hoarse, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. Jasper, the wise old dog, seemed to understand his master's intention. He wagged his tail slightly, came over, and sniffed the glove in Elias's hand. Then he turned and ran towards the forest where the small footprints were gradually fading. Elias followed his steps, slow but resolute. He knew he couldn't abandon a small life in this bitter cold. He had done something similar once, leaving his daughter on that road, and for 10 years that regret had gnawed at him daily. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Jasper led Elias deep into the woods. The tiny footprints on the snow grew fainter, as if the child had walked a very long way. The morning sunlight was no longer strong enough to penetrate the dense pine trees. The air grew heavy, and an invisible anxiety enveloped Elias. He told himself, "You're too late, Elias." Memories of that fateful day came flooding back as vivid as a slow-motion film. Sarah and Lily's car had skidded on the road during a sudden snowstorm. Elias, due to an emergency meeting, couldn't go with them. He had promised to pick them up, but in the end he was the one who arrived late. He came only to find their car mangled and the flashing lights and blaring sirens of emergency vehicles. The pain, like a knife, cut straight into his heart. And now, in this cold forest, he was searching for a child in a similar setting. Would he be in time? Elias shook his head, trying to banish the painful memories. He had to focus. He had to find that child. He quickened his pace, his heavy footsteps crunching on the snow. Jasper would occasionally stop and look at him as if to reassure him. Its eyes were filled with intelligence and loyalty. After almost an hour of walking, Jasper suddenly stopped. He stood beside an ancient snow-covered oak tree. A soft, low but warning growl came from his throat. Elias approached, his heart pounding. and then he saw it. Curled up at the base of the tree was a small boy. He had dark brown hair and a thin, pale face from the cold. His clothes were flimsy, not enough to withstand the winter chill. The boy's eyes were wide, staring intently at Elias. In those eyes, there was no child's curiosity, only abject fear. The boy raised his hands to shield his face, ready to defend himself. There were faint bruises on his arms and one of his cheeks. A powerful emotion coursed through Elias's heart. It wasn't just pity, but also anger. Anger that someone could be so cruel to a child. He knelt down gently, trying not to startle the boy. "Hey there, young man." Elias's voice was hoarse but full of gentleness. "I won't hurt you. You're cold, aren't you?" The boy didn't answer, just nodded slightly. His lips pressed tightly together. Elias took off his thickest jacket and slowly draped it over the boy's shoulders. The jacket was too big, almost swallowing his slender body. The boy's eyes widened, looking at Elias with suspicion, but no longer with the initial fear. "What's your name?" Elias asked. The boy was silent for a moment. Then a weak voice emerged. "Leo." "Leo," Elias repeated as if tasting the name. "That's a nice name, Leo." He stood up carefully, lifting the boy into his arms. The boy was too light. This feeling made Elias's heart ache. A healthy child shouldn't be this skinny. The boy didn't react, just curled up in his arms like a small cat finding a safe haven. Elias realized this wasn't a coincidence, this was destiny. He carried Leo back to the house. The way back seemed shorter, warmer. Jasper followed behind, also seeming relieved. When they reached the wooden house, Elias set Leo down on the armchair near the fireplace. For the first time in years, he felt a little life in this house. He went to make a cup of hot cocoa. The aroma of chocolate and warm milk spread throughout the room, chasing away the old musty smell. He handed the cocoa to Leo. The small, trembling hands took the mug, and the boy drank one sip after another. His cheeks flushed, and a little life returned to his eyes. "Did you run away from home, Leo?" Elias asked, his voice filled with sympathy. Leo nodded. Tears began to stream down his cheek. They didn't feed me. They said I was a bad kid." Leo's words were another knife plunging straight into Elias's heart. He sat down, listening to the boy's story. Leo talked about the beatings, the cold, hungry nights, and the cruel insults from his foster family. Elias remained silent. He looked at the bruises on the boy's arms, and a fire of anger ignited within him. He knew he couldn't let this child go back there. "I was so scared," Leo said, his voice trembling. "I walked all night. I just wanted to find a safe place." Elias looked into Leo's eyes, eyes that had witnessed too much cruelty. He knew the boy's innocence had been taken from him. And in that moment, Elias felt something change within himself. The layer of ice in his heart began to melt. He reached out gently, placing his hand on Leo's shoulder. "You found it, Leo," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "This is a safe place." The decision was made. He would protect this child. He would become a safe harbor for the boy, even if it meant he had to reopen the door to his own soul. Elias's life, which had been frozen in solitude, now had a crack, and that crack created by a small footprint in the snow, was the gateway for a ray of hope. After picking up the red glove, Elias no longer hesitated. He took a deep breath, feeling the bone-chilling cold of the American Midwest at the end of the year, and called for Jasper. His voice was deep and hoarse, as if it hadn't been used in a very long time. Jasper, the wise old dog, seemed to understand his master's intention. He wagged his tail gently, came over and sniffed the glove in Elias's hand. Then he turned and ran towards the forest where the small footprints were gradually fading. Elias followed his steps, heavy but full of determination. He knew he couldn't abandon a small life in this bitter cold. He had once done something similar, leaving his daughter behind on that road, and for 10 years that regret had gnawed at him daily. He would not make that mistake again. No matter the risk, no matter the trouble, he couldn't turn a blind eye to a solitary footprint in the snow. That footprint, tiny and desperate, was like a cry for help, echoing in the forest's silence. Jasper led Elias deeper into the woods. The small footprints on the snow grew fainter, as if the child had walked a very long way. The morning sunlight was no longer strong enough to penetrate the dense rows of pine trees. The air grew heavy, and an invisible sense of worry enveloped Elias. He told himself, "You're too late, Elias." Memories of that fateful day came flooding back, as clear as a slow-motion film. Sarah and Lily's car had skidded on the road during a sudden snowstorm. Elias, because of an emergency meeting, couldn't go with them. He had promised to pick them up, but in the end, he was the one who arrived too late. He arrived only to see their car mangled, the flashing lights of ambulances and the blaring sirens. That pain, like a knife, cut straight into his heart. And now, in this cold forest, he was searching for a child in a similar setting. Would he be in time? Elias shook his head, trying to chase away the painful memories. He had to focus. He had to find that child. He walked faster, his heavy footsteps crunching on the snow. Jasper would occasionally stop and look at him as if to reassure him. The dog's eyes were full of intelligence and loyalty. He sniffed the glove, then continued to lead the way. It seemed he too felt the desperation and urgency of this search. After nearly an hour of walking, Jasper suddenly stopped. He stood next to an ancient snow-covered oak tree. A soft, low but warning growl came from his throat. Elias moved closer, his heart pounding. And then he saw it. Huddled at the base of the tree was a small boy. His hair was dark brown, his face gaunt and pale from the cold. The boy's clothes were thin, a light jacket and torn jeans, not enough to withstand the bitter cold of winter. His eyes were wide, staring intently at Elias. In his gaze there was no child's curiosity, only extreme fear. The boy raised his hands to shield his face, ready to defend himself like a small animal cornered. There were faint bruises on his arms and one of his cheeks. The boy's face was marked with exhaustion, fear, and dried tears on his cheekbones. Elias felt a powerful surge of emotion run through his heart. It wasn't just pity, but also anger. Anger that someone could treat a child so cruelly. He knelt down gently, trying not to frighten the boy. "Hey, young man." Elias's voice was hoarse but full of tenderness. "I won't hurt you. You're cold, aren't you?" The boy didn't answer, just gave a slight nod. His lips pressed tightly together. Elias took off his thickest jacket and slowly draped it over the boy's shoulders. The jacket was too big, almost swallowing his thin body. The boy's eyes widened, looking at Elias with suspicion, but no longer with the initial fear. "What's your name?" Elias asked. The boy was silent for a moment. Then a weak voice emerged. "Leo." "Leo," Elias repeated as if tasting the name. "That's a very nice name, Leo." He stood up, carefully lifting the boy. The boy was so light, almost weightless. This feeling made Elias's heart ache. A healthy child shouldn't be this emaciated. The boy didn't react, just curled up in his arms like a small cat that had found a refuge. Elias realized this wasn't a coincidence. This was destiny. He carried Leo back to the house. The way back seemed shorter, warmer. Jasper followed behind, seeming to feel relieved as well. When they arrived at the wooden house, Elias set Leo down on the armchair near the fireplace. For the first time in years, he felt a bit of life in this house. The crackling of the logs in the fireplace sounded more cheerful than ever. He went to make a cup of hot cocoa. The aroma of chocolate and warm milk spread through the room, chasing away the old musty smell. He handed the cup of cocoa to Leo. The small, trembling hands took the cup, and the boy drank one sip after another. His cheeks flushed, and a little life returned to his eyes. "Did you run away from home, Leo?" Elias asked, his voice full of compassion. Leo nodded. Tears began to stream down his cheeks. They didn't feed me. They said I was a bad boy." Leo's words were another knife plunging straight into Elias's heart. He sat down listening to the boy's story. Leo talked about the beatings, the cold, hungry nights, and the harsh insults from his foster family. Elias remained silent. He looked at the bruises on the boy's arms, and a fire of anger flared up inside him. He knew he couldn't let this child return to that place. "I was so scared," Leo said, his voice trembling. "I've been walking since last night. I just wanted to find a safe place." Elias looked into Leo's eyes that had witnessed too much cruelty. He knew the boy's innocence had been stripped away. And in that moment, Elias felt something change within him. The layer of ice in his heart began to melt. He reached out gently, placing his hand on Leo's shoulder. "You found it, Leo," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "This is a safe place." The decision had been made. He would protect this child. He would become a haven for the boy, even if it meant he had to reopen the door to his own soul. Elias's life, which had been frozen in solitude, now had a crack, and that crack, created by a small footprint in the snow, was the very entrance for a ray of hope. After the snowstorm and the fateful encounter, Elias's house was no longer a lonely fortress. Leo's arrival had breathed new life into the silent space, melting the layer of ice that had sealed it for so many years. The wooden house, once a mere shelter for a broken heart, was now beginning to feel like a home. Leo quickly adapted to his new life. Though still shy, his eyes no longer held the extreme fear of that first night. Instead, they sparkled with curiosity and a touch of cautious joy. Elias, with his long, dormant fatherly instincts, began to care for the boy with great attention. He cooked hearty meals, no longer just a quick bite to survive. He bought the boy new clothes, replacing the tattered old ones. He taught the boy the small things in life, how to start a fire, how to identify different birds by their songs, and especially how to carve wood. Elias's workshop, which had been abandoned for a decade, now echoed with the sounds of saws, chisels, and a child's laughter. Elias spent hours showing Leo how to hold a chisel and how to smooth out a piece of wood. Leo proved to be an intelligent boy with skillful hands. He learned with great focus, his eyes lighting up whenever Elias praised a precise carve. Elias saw an image of his daughter Lily in Leo. Both shared the same passion for wood and creation. Elias felt as though he was being reborn, doing what he loved most, but this time to pass it on to someone worthy. Elias's life was no longer a repetition of empty days. He and Leo began to form a routine. Early in the morning they would have breakfast together, their voices bringing the house to life. In the afternoon they spent time in the workshop. Elias often told Leo stories about his craft, about the pieces he had made, the armchair he built for Sarah, or the small table for Lily. Leo listened intently, his imagination soaring with each story. For the first time, Leo felt like he belonged somewhere, that he was being heard and loved. One afternoon, while Elias was searching for some tools in the workshop, Leo decided to help him clean up. The boy wiped the dust from the shelves and rearranged the tools. His eyes fell upon an old wooden box tucked away in a dark corner. Curious Leo opened the box. Inside there was a faint scent of old wood and dried flowers. He found an unfinished wooden doll. It had a torso, arms and legs, but no face. Leo picked up the doll, examining it carefully. He could feel the meticulous care in every line, the gentleness in every grain of the wood. "Mr. Elias," his voice called out, "who did you make this for?" "It's beautiful." Elias was in another corner of the workshop. Hearing Leo's question, he froze. His heart tightened. He had tried to hide that box, but failed. He turned back and saw Leo holding the doll in his hands. A powerful wave of emotions washed over him, pain, regret, and even a touch of irrational anger. That doll belonged to Lily. It was an unfulfilled promise, a symbol of his loss. For 10 years he hadn't dared to touch it, hadn't dared to look at it, because each time he did, he was reminded of his failure. "Don't touch it!" Elias's voice was suddenly harsh and cold. "Put it down right now." Leo was startled. His eyes widened, filled with fear. He hurriedly put the doll down, but unfortunately it slipped from his hands and fell to the wooden floor, breaking one of its small arms. Elias looked at the doll's broken arm, and a wave of rage flared within him. He no longer saw the doll, but the image of Lily lying motionless. He lunged forward and snatched the doll from Leo's hands. "You bad boy," he shouted. "Why did you have to ruin my things?" Elias's anger wasn't directed at Leo, but at himself. But Leo didn't understand that. The boy only saw the fury in Elias's eyes and heard the harsh words he had grown too familiar with from his foster family. The old fear returned, swallowing him whole. He backed away, his eyes wet with tears, trembling. Elias saw the fear in Leo's eyes, and he was jolted back to reality. What had he done? He had repeated the very things that had haunted the boy. He had become just like those who had hurt Leo. Regret welled up, but it was too late. Leo backed away, speaking in a trembling voice. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Leo," Elias tried to say, but his voice caught in his throat. He looked at the doll in his hand, at its broken arm, and the pain overwhelmed him again. He turned his back, unable to face his own disappointment. "Go," he said, his voice lowering. "Leave me alone." Leo stood there motionless. Tears rolled down his cheeks. He understood. Elias had changed. His anger had shattered the wall of safety the boy had built. Everything was back to how it was. He had done something wrong, and now he would be punished. Silently, Leo walked into the house. Elias stood in the workshop, breathing heavily. He clutched the doll, feeling the pain of the past. He told himself, "You've ruined everything, Elias." He had let his pain hurt an innocent child. He had failed to protect Leo, just as he had failed to protect Lily. Inside the house, Leo grabbed his small backpack. He wrote a note with a shaky hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to make you sad." He placed it on the kitchen table next to the cold cocoa cup. He didn't want to stay, didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to see the disappointment in Elias's eyes again. Everything had been too good to be true, and now the truth was back. The world had no place for bad boys. Leo gently opened the back door. The cold air rushed in. He closed the door behind him. Outside, snowflakes began to fall. The boy looked out into the distance toward the forests. He would be alone again, searching for a safe place. Jasper lay by the fireplace, whimpering softly, as if he sensed something was wrong. He looked up at the door that had just closed then at the workshop where Elias still stood, motionless. A deep silence fell over the house. The silence of pain. Elias had broken the wall he had built. But at the same time, he had also unintentionally broken Leo's wall of safety, pushing the boy back into the harsh world. And somewhere in the forest, a small footprint began to appear on the fresh snow, heading towards the cold night. Elias stood motionless in the workshop. The wooden doll with the broken arm lay in his palm. His eyes blurred, not with sawdust, but with a thin haze of regret. What had he done? Just a few minutes ago, this house was filled with laughter and warmth. Now it was plunged into a cold silence, a silence even more frightening than when he was alone. He remembered his words, "You bad boy." Those words, one by one, were like knives stabbing his heart. He had become too accustomed to his own solitude, accustomed to trapping his pain in a hidden corner of his soul. But Leo's arrival had shattered everything. The boy had allowed him to feel the taste of life, of love again, and he hadn't known how to hold on to it. He had let the pain of the past overcome his reason, let irrational anger hurt an innocent child. Elias turned, looking at the wooden shelf where he used to place the toys he made for Lily. They were all covered in a thick layer of dust, just like his heart. He had lost his daughter, and now he was on the verge of losing another child, a child he had promised to protect. This pain, this time, was not an unexpected loss, but a loss he had caused himself. It was 100 times more painful. He set the doll down, his hands trembling. He looked out the workshop window and saw the snowflakes starting to fall harder. A storm. He was suddenly startled. The storm had been forecast. The entire area would be isolated. If Leo was out there now, he couldn't think any further. He rushed out of the workshop. Opening the door, he saw Jasper standing on the threshold, his eyes full of worry. The back door was ajar, and a cold gust of wind blew in. Leo's small backpack was gone. On the kitchen table, a single white note lay alone. Elias picked up the note, his hands shaking. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to make you sad." The child's scribbled handwriting, each letter like a tear falling onto the page. Elias felt as if someone had squeezed his heart. He had hurt the boy. He had pushed the boy back into the cold world he had been running from. He had done exactly what Leo's foster family had done, but with even greater cruelty he had given the boy hope, then snatched it away. "No, Leo," Elias whispered, his voice trembling. "It's not your fault, it's mine." He looked outside. The snowflakes were now a blinding white, blurring his vision. The wind howled gust after gust like his own heart's cry. He ran out of the house, not even stopping to put on a jacket, calling Leo's name in vain. His voice was swallowed by the storm. Everything seemed to revert to that fateful day 10 years ago. A snowstorm. A loss. But this time Elias would not be too late. He couldn't be. He was no longer a man consumed by the past. He had found a reason to live, and that reason was out there alone in the middle of the blizzard. He had to find Leo. He had to fix his mistake. Jasper ran after him, his nose to the snow, searching for the boy's scent. Jasper's barks echoed in the night, filled with worry. Elias ran faster, ignoring the bone-deep cold that was seeping into his skin. He didn't feel the cold. He only felt the fear rising in his chest. The fear of losing Leo. And as he ran, he remembered another memory, a memory he had tried to bury. A memory of Lily with her sparkling eyes and innocent smile. His daughter once asked him, "Daddy, what is pain?" And he had replied, "Pain is when you lose someone you love and can't do anything to change it." Now he understood that pain had another definition. Pain is when you have a chance to fix a mistake, but you let it slip through your fingers. Pain is when you see a child running away, and you are the one who pushed them away. Elias could not let that happen. He ran into the forest where small footprints were freshly imprinted on the snow. Leo's footprints already being covered by the falling snow. This time, they were no longer the footprints of a stranger. They were the footprints of family. Footprints he had to follow to find hope again, and to fix his own mistake. The wind howled and the snow flew swirling into Elias's face like sharp needles. He plunged into the forest, his flashlight beams swaying in the darkness, only bright enough to illuminate a few meters of snow-covered ground ahead. The cold was no longer just a simple sensation on his skin. It was eating into his bones, down to the core of the rising fear in his heart. He called Leo's name, but his voice was lost in the whistling wind and the loud cracking of breaking branches. "Leo, Leo, where are you?" Jasper ran ahead, his wet nose constantly sniffing the thick snow. The old dog seemed to understand the severity of the situation. He was no longer a leisurely companion, but a living compass guiding a desperate man. Leo's tiny footprints were almost completely covered by the snow, just faint, hard-to-distinguish indentations. Elias knew that with every passing minute, the chance of finding the boy grew slimmer. He ran, stumbled, and got back up. He didn't care about the cold that was freezing his hands and feet, or the branches lashing his face. In his mind, there was only one image: Leo's terrified eyes when he had been angry and the boy's apology on the note. He had ruined everything. He had let old pain cloud his judgment, and now he was paying the price. Memories of that fateful day came rushing back, clearer than ever. He remembered the night Sarah and Lily left. His little daughter had run up to hug him. "Daddy, promise you'll finish the doll before Christmas." And he had replied, "I promise, my dear girl." But that promise was never kept. Now he was facing another promise, an unspoken one to Leo, and he was in danger of breaking it again. This regret was a heavy weight on his shoulders. It was heavier than the pain of loss because this was a mistake of his own making. Elias stopped out of breath. He collapsed into the snow, his shoulders trembling. Was he repeating destiny? Had he been given a chance to atone, only to let it slip away? "Lily," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I couldn't protect you. And now I'm losing Leo too." In the middle of the blizzard, Jasper turned back gently, nipping at his pant leg. His eyes looked straight at Elias as if to say, "Don't give up, master. The boy is close by." Jasper's touch awakened Elias. He couldn't fall apart. He had failed once he couldn't fail again. He stood up, his body aching, but his will stronger than ever. He was no longer searching aimlessly. He was running, guided by Jasper, by a father's instinct. Jasper barked sharply, a decisive sound, and ran quickly towards a large rock crevice. Elias followed, his heart filled with both hope and fear. As he got closer, he saw a small figure huddled in the rock hollow. It was Leo. The boy was exhausted, his face pale, and he was nearly unconscious. Elias knelt down gently, embracing Leo. The boy's body was ice cold. Elias used his trembling hands to rub the boy's hands and feet, trying to transfer some warmth. He whispered, his voice shaking with emotion, "Leo, you're safe now. I found you." Leo's eyes opened. They were clouded, but still a little lucid. He looked at Elias, and then tears began to flow. They were not tears of fear, but of relief. The boy had believed he was abandoned, but Elias had come back for him. You're not angry at me?" Leo asked, his voice weak. Elias shook his head. He held the boy tightly, feeling Leo's fragile life. "No, Leo. I'm sorry. I couldn't control myself. I couldn't protect Lily's doll. And I let that pain hurt you. It was all my fault. You're not a bad boy. You're a brave boy. Very brave." Elias picked Leo up, holding him tightly to his chest, and headed back home. This time he walked slower, more steadily. He was no longer a lonely man. He was carrying a precious life. Though the blizzard still howled, a warm fire had ignited in his heart. He knew he would never let that flame die out again. When they arrived at the wooden house, Elias set Leo down on the armchair by the fireplace. He used a warm towel to wipe the boy's face, hands, and feet, and covered him with a thick blanket. Elias sat down, watching the fire burn in the fireplace, and he knew his life had changed forever. The footprints in the snow were not a sign of running away. They were a call for help. And he finally had answered. As Leo drifted off to sleep, Elias sat there quietly watching the boy. He had lost his daughter, but fate had given him a son. He had been granted a second chance. And this time he would not waste it. He would fight for this child, for his future, and for his own redemption. The next morning, when the blizzard had cleared, the sky was once again blue. The sound of a car engine echoed from a distance. It was the police. Elias's peaceful life had been shattered. But this time, he was no longer afraid. He was ready to face anything because he had found a reason to fight. The real battle was just beginning. After bringing Leo home safely, Elias set the boy down on the armchair by the fireplace. He used a warm towel to wipe his face, hands, and feet, and covered him with a thick blanket. Elias sat down quietly watching the fire burn in the fireplace. The flames danced in the darkness, illuminating his weary face. The snowstorm outside still howled, but inside the house a strange peace had settled. For the first time in 10 years, Elias felt his heart beat fully. It was no longer the heavy rhythm of pain and solitude. It was the beat of life, of love. He looked at Leo, the boy, sleeping peacefully, his face no longer showing fear. Elias had a chance. A second chance. He had lost his daughter, but fate had given him a son. He had been given an opportunity to atone for his mistakes, to become the man he had failed to be. He stayed awake all night. He sat by the fireplace watching the flames and reflecting on his life. He remembered his unfulfilled promise to Lily and the wooden doll with the broken arm. He suddenly understood that pain was not something to be buried. It was a part of life, and only by confronting it could one find healing. Leo had helped him do that. The boy, with his innocence and his own pain, had inadvertently broken the ice in his heart. When dawn broke, the snow had stopped. The sky turned blue, and the first sunlight of the new day shone into the house, melting the thin layers of ice on the window panes. Elias got up to make coffee. The sound of a car engine echoed from a distance. That sound, which was once a strange and unwelcome noise, now held a different meaning. He knew it was the police. The peaceful life he had built for himself had been shattered, but this time he was not afraid. He had found a reason to fight. A knock on the door came firm and clear. Elias went to open it. Outside were 2 police officers, their faces stern and worried. Behind them was a black car, and he recognized Leo's foster family. They got out of the car, their faces angry and possessive. "Sir," one of the officers said, "we received a report about a missing child. His name is Leo. Have you seen him?" Elias looked straight into their eyes without flinching. "Yes, I have. He's inside." Leo's foster family, a middle-aged couple with cold faces and calculating eyes, rushed forward. "That boy is ours. Hand him over now." Elias stood in the doorway, his voice deep and strong. "The boy ran away from you. I found him in the forest, nearly frozen to death." The foster father's anger flared up. "You're lying. We never treated him badly. He's just a bad kid who runs away all the time." Elias didn't argue. He stepped back, gesturing to the armchair where Leo was still fast asleep. "Take a look. That's the result of your care." The 2 police officers stepped inside. They saw Leo, his face thin, the bruises on his arms. They saw the boy sleeping peacefully, something they knew was impossible for an abused child. One of them took out a notepad and began writing carefully. Elias recounted everything. He told them about the lone footprint in the snow, about the red glove, about finding Leo in the forest, and about what the boy had told him. He pointed to the bruises on the boy's arms. "I don't know what you did, but I will not let the boy go back with you." "You have no right," the foster mother yelled. "We are his legal guardians." Elias looked at them. His eyes were filled with anger and resolve. "I don't care. From now on, I am his family." In that moment, Elias understood that he had found a new purpose. He would not only protect Leo from the blizzard, but he would protect the boy from the people who had hurt him. The real battle was just beginning. A battle not just for survival, but to live a full life, to fix past mistakes, and to find a new family, one built on love, not blood. The arrival of the police and Leo's foster family turned Elias's wooden house into a legal battlefield. His quiet life, which had revolved only around Jasper and his wood carvings, was now disrupted by interrogations, accusations, and cold, calculating looks. Leo's foster parents, the Millers, appeared outwardly respectable. They were well-dressed, spoke calmly, and tried to present themselves as victims of a troubled boy and an eccentric old man who had abducted their foster son. They told the police that Leo was a difficult child who often ran away, and that they had given him all their love and care. These words, spoken so fluently, could have fooled anyone. But Elias knew the truth. While they spoke, Elias stood in the doorway shielding Leo. The boy had woken up and was huddled in the armchair, his eyes staring in fear at the people who had hurt him. Elias didn't need to say much. He just pointed to the bruises still visible on Leo's thin arms and the fear in the boy's eyes. That evidence said it all. A social worker, Sarah Jenkins, was with the police. She was a young woman with eyes full of empathy. She took the time to speak with Leo, privately asking him what had happened. Elias watched them from a distance, a strange emotion swelling within him. He hadn't trusted people for years, but seeing how Sarah patiently and gently spoke with Leo, he felt a spark of hope. After their conversation, Sarah approached Elias. "Sir," she said, her voice serious, "I need to take the boy to a temporary care facility. By law, we can't leave him here." Elias's heart tightened. He had fought so hard to bring Leo home safely, and now they wanted to take the boy away. He looked straight into her eyes, his voice filled with determination. "I won't let that happen. I'm going to adopt him." Elias's declaration stunned everyone. The Millers laughed derisively. "Who does this old man think he is? You're too old and not fit to care for a child." Sarah Jenkins looked at Elias. She saw the resolve and the love in his eyes. She understood that he wasn't an eccentric man, but a father. She had seen enough cases of child abuse to trust what Leo had told her. "Sir," she said, "that's a very complicated process. You will have to prove you're capable, and the Millers may sue you." "I know," Elias replied, his voice unwavering. "But I will do it. I will do anything to protect the boy." Elias began a new battle. With Sarah's help, he started to prepare the paperwork. He had to clean the house and his workshop, install a new heating system, and renovate the house to meet safety standards. It was not an easy job, but Elias did it all with his heart. Every hammer swing, every saw cut, every task he performed was for Leo. In addition, he had to face interviews, psychological evaluations, and the scrutiny of the court. He told his story about the pain of losing his wife and daughter, about 10 years of solitude and Leo's arrival. He wasn't shy about his pain because he knew it was a part of who he was, and it had helped him become the person he was today. The Millers, with the help of a good lawyer, tried every means to fight him. They presented evidence that Elias was a lonely man who had suffered from depression after the death of his wife and daughter. They accused him of taking advantage of the boy. Elias and Leo had to face a series of interrogations with questions that were probing and full of suspicion. During one tense hearing, the Miller's lawyer asked Leo, "Do you want to stay with Mr. Elias, or do you want to go back home with your foster parents?" Leo looked at Elias, then at the people who had hurt him. He held Elias's hand tightly, and his voice rang out clearly, "This is my home, and he is my family." Leo's words silenced everyone in the room. Elias felt a hot tear roll down his cheek. He was no longer a lonely man fighting on his own. He had Leo by his side. The battle was far from over, but Elias knew he would never give up. He had found a reason to live, to fight, and to love. And most importantly, he had found a family. The footprints in the snow were not a sign of flight, but a path leading to a new life, a life filled with hope and love. The legal battle dragged on for many months. The days were not easy. The court required numerous investigations, psychological evaluations, and rigorous interviews. The Miller family, with the help of their lawyer, continued to try to discredit Elias. They claimed he was an old, lonely man, haunted by his past and unfit to raise a child. But Elias did not waver. He didn't fight with bitter words, but with his actions and sincerity. He dedicated every minute to caring for Leo, teaching him, playing with him, and most importantly, giving Leo a place to feel safe. Sarah Jenkins, the social worker, became a solid ally. She believed in Elias and what she had seen. She submitted detailed reports about Leo's positive development while with Elias. She proved that this was not a temporary arrangement, but a true family being formed. In the final court hearing, Elias stood before the judge. He didn't talk about what he had done for Leo, but about what Leo had done for him. "Your Honor," he began, his voice deep and clear. 10 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter in an accident. Since then, I have lived in solitude in a pain I thought would never end. I locked the door to my heart. He looked toward Leo, who was sitting in the gallery, his eyes filled with worry. But then one day I found a footprint in the snow. That footprint led me to a boy who was running a small and wounded soul. I helped the boy, but in truth he saved me. He paused, taking a deep breath. Leo taught me how to love again. He gave me a reason to wake up every morning and a reason to live, to laugh. He helped me heal wounds I thought would never close. My name may not be on his birth certificate, but in my heart he is my son. You can take away my legal guardianship, but you cannot take away the fact that we have become a family. Elias's words silenced the entire room. Even the Millers were quiet. Their lawyers looked at each other, seemingly moved by his sincerity. Finally, the judge brought down the gavel. After considering all the evidence, listening to the testimonies from both sides, and based on the positive development of the boy Leo, the court has decided to approve Mr. Elias Thorne's application for legal guardianship. In that moment, Elias felt a sense of release. Tears rolled down his cheeks. He no longer had to fight. He had won. He looked at Leo, and the boy's radiant smile said it all. The boy ran to him, wrapping his arms around him. This was not just a legal victory, but a victory of love and hope. A few weeks later, all the snow had melted. Spring had arrived, bringing warmth and life. The field in front of Elias's house was no longer white, but was dotted with the green of new grass. One morning, Elias and Leo went outside together. Elias carried a shovel and Leo held a small oak sapling. They walked to an open plot of land near the workshop. "I've been thinking about this tree for a long time," Elias said, his voice full of affection. "It will grow up with you. It will become a big, strong oak." They worked together to dig the earth and place the sapling. Elias used his hands to pile up the soil, and Leo watered the tree. They stood there silently, looking at the small plant as if seeing their own future. Elias looked at Leo. The boy's face was no longer gaunt, and his eyes were no longer filled with fear. His smile was as bright as the spring sunlight. Their relationship, like this young tree, was being nourished by love, trust, and compassion. "Mr. Elias," Leo said, "I found something when we were planting the tree." The boy pointed to the ground. It was the very last snowflake, a leftover on the moist soil. It had almost melted, but its tiny, fragile shape was still there. Elias looked at the snowflake, then at Leo. He smiled softly. "That's a reminder, Leo. A reminder of where we started and of the footprints that led us here. The footprint in the snow was no longer a sign of flight. It was a sign of life. Elias's footprints had led him to search, and Leo's footprints had led him to find a family. Both sets of footprints had met, and together they created a new path, a path of healing, of love and of hope.